the reason is. Is it a coincidence that ever since, I was on the podcast and Mayron was on podcast number 73 talking about investing in Milwaukee, that somehow the rise of out-of-state investors, coming to Milwaukee, I guess it's just a coincidence. Who knows?
I'm sure it has nothing to do with BiggerPockets members.
Yeah, all because of BiggerPockets has spurred the economy of Milwaukee. So that was great. But yeah, it definitely has been harder to find, deals in the Milwaukee area, at least in the, 3% type of property. You just can't, really get that anymore. So unfortunately, these people here in Milwaukee are having to settle for, 2% or maybe, 1.75. I know it breaks people's hearts.
I just made an offer about 12 minutes ago on a property that if I get 0.66% return, I am going to be swimming. So, I feel so bad for you. The 2%. Oh no, don't. No, but I mean, it's a great problem to have, to not be able to get the 3% anymore. Now you only get 2 or 2.5. But I can see why you would want the 3. That's really awesome.
Yeah. I think everybody wants to pay as little as possible for as much profit as possible. I think that's just kind of the way that everybody would like things to go.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption. So how many properties do you currently own?
I currently own actually 15 properties, and I don't have them all up and running quite yet. There's been the infamous $3,500 house that I posted on that I'm still in the process of trying to get live, so to speak. And I'm also working on rehabbing another property at the same time. So I've been definitely having my hands full. And
you bought the 39. The original forum post said $3,900 house, and then you negotiated a discount. What was that discount for again?
It was a $400 discount because somebody had taken some copper out of the property. However, I was looking to replace the plumbing in the house anyway. So to me, it really didn't make a difference, but I just figured why not try, and I got a little extra money. So that $400 could go towards, finishing touches on the property.
Hey, $400 is $400. I'll take $400 anytime anybody wants to give it to me.
Yep.
Now, did they take all of the copper out? I had a property, conveniently enough, it was in Milwaukee or in Madison, which is in Wisconsin. And they got some of my copper as well. Although my husband actually walked into the property as they were stealing it. So they didn't get it all. But they still got some of it, and it's a pain in the butt and whatever. Did they take all of the copper, or did they just take a little bit?
Well, actually, most of the pipe in the house was galvanized, so they only took a tiny bit of copper. And really, like I said, it was one of those things that probably wasn't even worth $400. But again, I just asked for a small concession to make it a nice, even $3,500 number.
Sure. Well, that's great. That is, so your $3,500 house now.
Yes.
When did you purchase it? And when do you think it'll be rent ready? When do you think you'll be advertising it for rentals?
Okay, well, I actually purchased it about 3.5 months ago. And so my original timeline to complete it was in 2 months. And obviously I overshot that. And I've been working on so many other things. I'm at this point where the property is basically complete. I just need to get in there and get a good cleaning done to it. So I need to get somebody scheduled over there to go in and just basically wipe down everything. There's been, just dust from contractors working in there, and, they always leave things pretty dirty. And so it's just a matter of getting things cleaned up and making it all presentable.
Okay. And so now we're coming up on Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, and, the ideal time to rent in Milwaukee, where it's nice and 60 degrees all winter long. When do you think you're going to put it on the market? Let's say you got somebody in there tomorrow to clean it. Are you going to try and market it during the holiday season? Or are you going to wait until next year?
No, I think I would probably just put it on the market right away. And then I would actually start by telling all of my current clients, tenants, about the property and just seeing if they know of anybody that is looking to rent a place. Believe it or not, advertising to your existing customer base or your tenant base is a great way to find other tenants, because if you have somebody that is a good tenant, usually good people know other good people.
Right. And they know that you are a good landlord, and there's no shortage of bad landlords out there. It's nice
Oh,
to
yeah.
not have to roll the dice on that. Okay, so are you comfortable talking numbers about the $3,900 house? Or are you still finalizing those?
I'm still finalizing them. I know some of the numbers off the top of my head, but it's basically I've got a big spreadsheet that I've been keeping track of everything and kind of categorizing it, because I knew at some point what I wanted to do was share on the forums in the posts that I created, kind of a breakdown. Okay, this is the numbers of what I spent on plumbing. This is the numbers of what I spend on flooring, on paint, on this and that.
I'm still following that post too. I will put a link to the replay of this, and I have to apologize to everybody. I started the recording about 2 minutes into it. I'm sorry. I forgot to hit record. But you had just started talking about, you had just really got started talking, so they didn't miss that much, just me telling them all that. So I will put a link into the replay underneath about the $3,900 house, your BiggerPockets profile, your website. What else did I have in there? Oh, and a link to the original BiggerPockets podcast, show 29.
Yes.
Where Dawn tells all about her amazing 3% ridiculous returns. I'm just jealous. So let's go through, thanks, Josh. Let's go through the screening process.
Okay.
So you told your current tenants about it. You've put an ad on Craigslist or Postlets or however you do yours. Well, let's talk about, where do you advertise your rentals? What gives you the best return? What gives you the most qualified tenants?
I've actually had somewhat of a split success with the combination of Craigslist and also posting things to Postlets. And that's also a little bit of a, controversy or debate among people on BiggerPockets, because a lot of times people will say, oh, I get nothing but garbage leads off of Craigslist, people that aren't qualified, etc. But I've actually found in this particular market, and maybe it is a market thing, that you can get some good leads off of Craigslist ads. There are definite scams, because I have been, contacted by people who said, oh, I just want to make sure that this is a real property and that you are, the real owner, etc. Because people will still post scams on Craigslist, and everybody has to be careful. But besides Craigslist and Postlets is a syndication service, so it sends out to HotPads and I think Zillow and Truly and those type of services. But besides all those, I also, like I said, market to existing tenants so that they can pass on referrals. And then also, while I'm having open houses for one property, I will put a list of available properties at that property so people can find out about other ones that are out there. So again, it's kind of like social media marketing, where you want to try to reach as many people as possible and then see if, well, maybe that particular property doesn't work for them, but they may know of somebody else that would be a good fit for property B or C or whatnot. So a lot of different marketing types that come into play.
So cross-marketing, that sounds like a really great tip.
And that really only works, of course, if you have, maybe multiple properties available at one time.
Sure.
So the initial landlord that's just trying to advertise with one property, another potential area of advertising is to distribute flyers to places like your local grocery store, or maybe the local bank or the library, or other places that will allow advertisements like that. Those are some things that people don't necessarily always think of.
Okay, and that's a great, I think that anything that's free is absolutely worth trying, because you never know where you're going to get your next really awesome tenant.
Yeah, and word of mouth is a great referral source, because people are more apt to believe word of mouth than just something they see on the internet.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a really good comment. So Josh Diaz has a question for you, Dawn. Have you ever come across a scam on Craigslist where someone is trying to sell or rent one of your properties that you didn't authorize?
Actually, yes, I did come across that. That was a couple of years ago. It was a Craigslist post that somebody had sort of taken my pictures and kind of replaced them with their own text on the ad and listed the property for a lesser amount than what I was actually renting the property for. And I found this out because I was actually at the property doing some work of some type, and a couple of people came up, a mother and a daughter, and they asked, "Are you the owner?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And said, "So you're renting this for like, I don't know what the amount was, like $500 or something, you know, completely ridiculously cheap." And I said, "Oh, no, that's not the rent amount." And she said, "Well, I saw this on Craigslist and it didn't sound like it was too good to be true." And so I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's definitely a scam." And I said, "I hope you didn't send any money to this person." Or when they said, no, we wanted to check it out to make sure it was legit." So since then, I've actually adopted a strategy of not posting pictures of the outside of the properties, because what people will do is if they see the address or they get outside pictures of the properties, they're more likely to find them and try to post information about the property as if it was their own. Ever since I've stopped posting addresses or outside pictures, I've had nobody try to steal my ads.
Okay, I thought I had heard something or read something about that with you, and I'm really glad that Josh asked that question, because do you watermark your pictures at all, or do you just put them up?
I started, after that happened, I started trying to do a watermark on the pictures, but it just became too time consuming. So I just found that without posting the external, the outside pictures of the property, it worked just fine. So I stayed with that.
Okay, great. So once you have found somebody who wants to rent your property, they fill out an application. And how many pages is your application?
I actually have a 4-page application, and just to take a little step back, one of the things that people ask a lot on the forums is about, having open houses versus individual showings. I've seen that question come up a number of times. I actually prefer open house type showings because it can get extremely tedious to try to meet with people and have them not show up or not call, and then you've already more or less booked the time, so to speak, and you're just kind of wasting your time. So I've decided to go to the open house type format. I get a number of people who contact me, want to see the place. I kind of have a schedule all lined up. Okay, this day I'm going to be at this property from this time to this time, and then I'm going to be at another property from this time to this time, which it's really helpful to, if you have multiple properties, get a schedule lined up in advance, because if you have that flyer at your open houses showing other properties that are available, you can tell people, okay, yeah, if you're interested or you know somebody that's interested, why don't you have them come over at this time, and then you have it all lined up. And I've actually found that that's somewhat helpful, because if I get, 15 people signed up to see the property, or 15 people who said they wanted to see the property on a particular day, I might only get, 8 or 10 people that actually show up, because people, they have to work late, or they get called into work when they didn't expect to, or they just forget about it, or they lose their paper with the addresses, or there could be a million reasons why people don't do it, or they're just rude and inconsiderate. You never know. And so, yeah, then I wind up, I'm there, but I still get people coming, and I don't feel like it's a waste of my time. And if they don't show up, because they're rude and inconsiderate, those are not the people I would want as tenants anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how long do you schedule an open house? And do you find that during the week or the weekends are better? Do you have multiple open houses? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I found that with the open houses, I like to try to schedule them one at a time, meaning for the same property. I don't try to schedule usually more than one at a time, because if I say, well, I've got this one on Monday and another one on Friday, that's more or less setting me up to say I'm not going to find anybody on Monday. So I like to look at the applications from one, and then if I don't get anybody or nobody looks promising, then I would schedule a follow-up appointment. As far as what times are best, I've actually tried various different times for open houses and various different days, because I wanted to learn what works best in this particular market. Other markets may be different, of course. And so you kind of have to learn what works best for the community that you're in. I've actually found that weekends are really good, and specifically the morning and the weekends, because I feel that people, like if I do something on a Saturday night, maybe people are out, partying or whatnot. And so that doesn't seem to work out very good. But Saturday and Sunday mornings tend to work out really good. A very local thing that may not necessarily apply to all communities is that on Sundays, there are Packer games here in Wisconsin, and you do not want to schedule anything during a Packer game because you are just not going to get anybody other than the people that don't care about football. So I usually try to schedule my grocery shopping during the Packer game because I care about football, and then I can go there and I'm not, in a crowd of people doing that. So yeah, there's like certain things, like I said, you have to kind of learn about your community. I like to schedule viewings for about an hour long, so I don't try to drag them out so I'm there, a really long time. And that generally gives people enough time to take a look at the place, ask questions, fill out the application and so forth. And after 5 is a good time. 4:30 to 5:30 is really good. I found to schedule open houses. And like I said, Saturday and Sunday mornings are also pretty good.
Okay. And typically when you've got, you said you've got 15 properties, typically how many open houses are you scheduling to find a qualified tenant?
Well, it definitely varies on the property and varies on the rent amount. If you advertise pretty much, what I found is if you advertise at market rent, it may take you a little bit longer to find a qualified tenant because you're competing with everybody else that's out there that's also advertising at market rent. If you schedule you set your property rental rate at a little bit below market rent, then you're going to find, I found it's easier to find somebody because now you're looking so much better than what the competition is. So that actually plays an impact into how long it will take to rent it out.
Now, when you're talking below market rent, what would market rent be and what are you offering your property at? Are you significantly lower? It doesn't sound like you really need to be significantly lower. But...
No, I mean, the properties that I always try to have quality properties where if somebody walks in, it would be a property that I personally would want to live in. I would be okay living in this property. If it was something that just was, disgusting, things were falling off the walls, et cetera, it's like I wouldn't want to live there. That would not be a good representation of a property that I would want to, present to a tenant either. So yeah, these are.
Is it the slumlord?
No, nothing with the slumlord box actually falls into my category. But yeah, when I say below market rent, I'm not talking about $100 below market rent, but I would talk about something like maybe $25, $30 below market rent. You want to get it, you want to find that sweet spot where it's below enough that people will take more interest, but not so far below that you're going to wind up losing money. I've also found that a very small shift can actually make a big difference. So for example, instead of renting for $800 a month, you rent for $795, starting with a 7, using that retailer trick, which of course retailers have spent a ton of money, and why they always price something at $39.99 versus $40. They do that for a reason, and you can, as a landlord, can take advantage of that same type of trick too.
What an awesome tip. I'm going to have to go back and watch this whole thing and write these all down because there's too many to just take. I type a lot faster than I write. Okay, so you have your open house, you have your stack of applications. What is your next step? Let's say you've gotten your first open house. What are you looking for when you're going through your tenant screening? Okay.
Tenant screening is also a very highly discussed topic on BiggerPockets. I see a number of questions in the forums about, hey, can you help me figure out what's the best tenant to pick from? And then they list, 3 different options of tenants that they've gotten. Or another question might be, well, I've gotten somebody that applied that had this, this, and this. Is this a good tenant to, take on board? So you can definitely tell that there's a lot of newbie questions in the forums, and those are great because, asking other people questions is a great way to learn and just to try to develop your own process through this. So I'll talk a little bit about my process, but I want to make sure that I emphasize to everybody that, you want to make sure you learn your landlord-tenant laws according to your state. Every state is different, and not every state or locality has the same, information that is available to them. Now, Wisconsin is kind of nice in the fact that when I get an application, we have some really nice open records information here in the state of Wisconsin. I can go online, I can put in somebody's name, I can hit search, and within 5 minutes I can see a history of all of the civil and criminal information that has been processed against them. So, as an example, I looked up a recent applicant, and within, just a couple minutes, I found, she's had 6 evictions in the past 10 years.
Did you cost?
No.
She's got a great story.
That information didn't cost me a single penny to get. And I feel like, that's kind of lucky for me to be able to live in a state that provides such information to you. I can also
kind of about it. You are super, super, super lucky.
Yeah. So yeah, I can look up information about in the city of Milwaukee, the municipal court system. So I can see, have they had issues with, assault and battery? Have they had issues with, maybe drug possession or something like that? So I can look up both the civil and the criminal side. And all of this information is free resources. And not all states actually have that. And I've definitely learned that because I've tried to do searches in other states like Michigan and Mississippi and finding out, wow, this information is either, like, for example, locked down to attorneys only, or you have to subscribe to some database and pay a yearly fee, or you have to pay a fee per search. And there's a lot of information that, people can't get if they live in other states. So luckily, I can get all of that information at no charge. Now, that's a great resource for me, but I'd also like to point out that even if you live in a state where some of that information is locked down, there are other resources that people can still take advantage of too that don't cost anything. One of your biggest ones is just calling prior landlords. You want to look up the information on those prior landlords. Take what the tenant gives you, but look it up and verify it for yourself. You don't want to run into the situation where the tenant has written down the name of their best friend or, their cousin or somebody who's going to give them a glowing reference when really they've, wound up trashing the place and they're almost on their way out. So look that information up. You can generally find that information on your city assessor's website or your county assessor's website, and verify the name that they gave you is the name that is actually on the records. Now, sometimes on public records, you can find out the actual phone number. Milwaukee is also really great about that too. We have the Department of Neighborhood Services where you can look up the property address and it will tell you the name and the phone numbers of the owner as well. So it's got a lot of, free information to us.
I want to jump in really quick. I saw a great tip from somebody who said, while you're talking to the previous landlord, ask them, what was the address again? Or ask them to confirm the address or give them the wrong address. Oh, was that at this and such address? And sometimes you can catch the friend in a lie because they don't have the actual address, or, I got to go, and they hang up on you. And that to me would be an automatic disqualification. If you're going to lie to me on the application, what else are you going to lie to me about? So, just another question to ask the previous landlord. Now, I've also seen people recommend that you contact not their current landlord, but like the landlord behind them or the landlord in front of them, so that you may come into a situation where you are you're contacting somebody who is so desperate to get this person out of their house that they'll give them a glowing review just so they have someplace else to go.
Oh yeah, and that has definitely happened to me. I had a situation once where I contacted the current landlord, made sure it was them, and they gave this tenant a glowing response. I was like, oh, this is great. They said, the person, maybe paid a couple times late, but overall they took really good care of the house. They were wonderful, etc. So I called the landlord that was prior to that, who was like maybe a year or two prior. And they said, oh, this tenant was horrible. She trashed the place. She let her kids run around and, they caused damage. And I'm like, well, obviously this person, generally people are not going to do a 180 on their personalities within a year or two. And so 2 and 2 adds up together and says, well, this current landlord is probably one of those who's desperate, wants to get this person out. And yeah, you really have to go back, even if it means contacting a landlord. I've contacted somebody that was like from 6 years ago, and they're like, oh yeah, I remember that person. It was kind of like going back in history, but I've done it just to make sure that I can completely verify somebody and, verify their story, verify their information, and so forth.
Sure. Even though you're not paying $1 million for your property, you're still paying something for your property, and it's an investment. I'm assuming you're not doing this just to provide free housing for people who can't find anything else to destroy.
No, it's a business, not a charity.
Now, you've been a landlord since 06, 08, 10, I can't remember.
Well, I mentioned in my original podcast that I started in 2008, and that was actually with a couple of properties in northern Wisconsin, both of which I've since sold. And I actually started investing in Milwaukee in 2011. So I would consider my Milwaukee experiences to be about 4.5 years now.
Okay. Do you keep records of your tenant experiences so that when somebody calls up from 6 years ago, you can say, oh, they were awful or they were amazing? Or do you?
Yeah, luckily I don't have hundreds of tenants, so it's not as big of an issue. I definitely remember every single one of my tenants, what they were like, why they left. I've got records on, who their, all their names, what their kids' names are, their birth dates, their kids' birth dates. I have basically all the information. What's surprising, though, is that I've actually gotten very few reference calls. I mean, I have had tenants leave. That happens. Most of my tenants are pretty long term, but from when I have had them leave, I've actually only ever gotten one, I think maybe 1 or 2 reference calls. It's been kind of interesting that other landlords don't take the time to call prior references. And I've definitely seen that, mentioned and talked about elsewhere.
That is pretty funny that, not funny, sad that people won't take the time to call. I mean, this is, presumably you're a landlord because you want to make money and you want to get the most qualified, no, maybe not the most qualified. You want to get the person who is definitely going to pay you rent on time, every time. And, they might not be the most qualified person, but they're the one who's going to make the payments on time, every time. And I think that, a lot of people just want to grab anybody. Josh said, but it takes too long. I need a tenant like 5 minutes ago. One of the things that I have always said is it is far better to have your property empty for a month while you're waiting to find the person that will make your payments and pay you on time and take good care of the property than it is to just get somebody in there and then all of a sudden you're going through eviction. And how long does an eviction take? 2 months, 3 months, 5 months? I have a friend who has had a property in Chicago. It was a 3-flat. I'm not sure if she even still has the property anymore. It was more like a coworker. Anyway, she didn't do her background screening and she got a guy in. It was a 3-flat. She was in one, then somebody was in another one and they paid and they aren't part of the story. The other guy didn't pay. Oh, I published this. And you're like, how did she not notice the diapers piling up in the backyard? Like it was winter time and they had kids and they moved in and they only had half the security deposit and they couldn't come up with the rest of the security deposit. And then like 3 weeks into the thing, they're like, yeah, we're not going to pay any rent. Sorry. And I can do work on the house. And she's like, no, you got to leave. And they're like, no, sorry. So it took, I think, 3 months, 5 months for the eviction because in Chicago at that time, it was very difficult to evict somebody with children. And they were throwing diapers out of the window and it was either fall or winter. I think it was winter and the snow had covered it or something. So she didn't notice right away that there was this giant pile of garbage and diapers in the backyard.
That must have been great come spring.
That's why you got to screen. You don't want to come into a big pile of dirty diapers in the backyard. So we've got a couple of questions over here.
Okay.
Kiski, a queen, says, I have horrible tenants. I am ready to give away the building.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely seen some, questions on the forum about, I can't handle this. Just keep in mind that not everybody is necessarily cut out to be a landlord. You might not have the time. You prefer to work at your day job, or you just have a day job that's too demanding, and you want to invest in real estate, but you don't have the time to actually manage the property, or you don't even have the desire. Not everybody has the desire to do every single thing. I don't have the desire to work on my car. I'd rather outsource that to somebody else. So definitely, somebody might think, okay, well, is it something where either I outsource the actual management of the property to somebody else, or do I sell it? Do I want to keep it as an investment, but I just don't want to do this particular part of the work? Or is it a bad investment overall? So that's one of those things that you have to really kind of decide for yourself and determine which way you want to take it.
Yeah, and not every property is a good investment.
Exactly.
Not every area is a good place to invest. So, yeah, I think that's a good point. You could be an investor who is almost completely hands off. I don't think there's a rental investment, a real estate investment that could totally be 100% hands off. Maybe a REIT. That's a real estate investment trust. It's bought and sold like stocks are. She says, I want to be an investor, but it's an inherited property overseas, and the attorney is keeping the money and charging us for his services, claiming the tenants are not paying.
That sounds kind of like a legal issue that, is way more complicated than something we could answer on this little chat here.
It does. Kiski, are you a member of BiggerPockets? That would be a good question for the investing in foreign real estate question or forums. So I would go over to the forums and ask that question. I'm not sure what country it is. I've only ever invested in America, so I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. But there are a lot of really great people on the forums that can help you out. So we've got Josh has a question. What if the current landlord reference is the only landlord? So where are you going after you've done your little background, or you've called your past landlords? Is that your first step, or do you go through the Wisconsin freebie amazing tenant research website?
I use the free resources first, because again, if I see on their records that they've had 6 evictions in 10 years, do I really need to contact the current landlord at that point? No, it doesn't. I've kind of seen a history of behavior that I don't even want to go further with that person.
But maybe it's a good story. Maybe it was their sister's best friend's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend that really hosed up their credit.
Yeah, I've definitely, over time of, I've probably had hundreds of applications for the various properties that I rent out, and I've heard a lot of stories. I've also been told a lot of lies. So you kind of become a little bit of a private detective trying to figure out, I've had people misspell their name on the application because, a different name was, better than what their actual name was. I've had people write down their incorrect birth date. I've had, people do this or that. And it's like when you get all of these, you become, very adept at weeding out all of these little lies and things that people like to tell because they want to, sneak their way into your property. So yeah, it's like, there's a lot of little tricks and things people will do. And getting over those is it just takes time and experience, I think. And if you just learn all the little tips and tricks of things that people will try to do, you can learn to go around them. And I don't know if I answered the question was about if you only have one landlord reference. I would say you're never going to have just one reference, because somebody has always lived somewhere for their lifetime. Now, it could be a first-time renter that, let's say that they've always just lived at home and they don't have any other landlord or reference experience. Why not call the parents' landlord and just find out, have there been any problems with the children? Have there been any problems with this person? Obviously, if you're going to be renting to somebody, you can't legally enter into a contract with somebody that is not an adult. So if they're an adult, you can ask about them as long as you get, them to sign your rental agreement that states you can check into their background. So that's one solution, especially if, let's say, they've only had one landlord since they've lived with their parents. Do the same thing. So that's a good way of going about things.
Okay. No, that's a really great tip. I like that a lot. I want to jump in really quick and say, Kiski, my email is mindy@biggerpockets.com, and send me a note if you can't get in, and I'll look up your old account and we'll get you all hooked up. So don't worry about not having your password. Okay. So back to screening, Dawn.
Okay.
What is an absolute, I will not rent to this person, red flag? You mentioned evictions and lying to you on their application. Are there anything else that absolutely, nope, it's Mindy@biggerpockets.com. Sorry. What absolutely would you say no way to?
Well, you've hit on the big two. I mean, if somebody lies on their application, basically they're setting the tone for your relationship, and the relationship is, I don't respect you. And so that's always, something that I would definitely not want to go forward with on that person. If I get somebody with, a ton of evictions, I would definitely not go forward with that. Now, of course, there is a threshold that people will put. Some people will say absolutely no evictions anytime in somebody's life. I'm not as strict, because I will say, okay, I understand that if somebody is young, sometimes, young, and I call young people like 20, 21, that's just showing my age here. But, when you're young, sometimes you don't necessarily think things through, and you may have gotten eviction because you did something dumb. I can understand that. But if somebody is, 38 and you're disqualifying them because of an eviction that they had when they were 20, I personally think that's a little harsh. And I do a general look back on evictions, for the past 5 years. And I say, okay, if it's prior to 5 years ago, I can believe that maybe somebody changed their life around in 5 years. If it's a year or two, then I don't think that they've had enough time to really turn their life around that way. Also, I look at the judgments on the eviction. If it was an eviction where, they moved out and you can see that they didn't have a judgment against them, a monetary judgment against them, then that's definitely more favorable than, let's say you look at somebody and they have a judgment of like $5,000. Well, obviously that is either they didn't pay rent for a long time or they caused a lot of damages or something. So when you're a landlord, you really have to look at a lot of different variables in your process. But it's also very important that you treat people equally and write out your screening criteria in advance. To take this back to the open house thing, besides having my applications there, my stack of applications, like you said, and the list of any other available properties that I have, I will also have a sample copy of my lease agreement available for somebody to take a look at. And I'll also have in writing my screening criteria. I generally print out a couple copies of the screening criteria in writing and put them, I print them on yellow paper so it's very easy to see, and put them in a couple different places in the property so people can take a look at them. Because it's always very important to make sure that you're not discriminating against people and you're following all of the fair, housing rules. You're not discriminating against, race, gender, ethnicity. I can't say that word, but you get the basic idea that you're not discriminating in any way. So if you put a set of written screening criteria out there and make sure that you follow them with your application, you can't necessarily just disqualify somebody because you didn't like them, because that can actually be considered discriminatory as well. I mean, generally we tend to like people that are like us. And if you tend to like people that are like you, well, maybe you tend to like people that, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something, are white versus, non-white or something like that, or are Native American versus non-Native American. You can't do those type of things when you're renting out properties. And so you want to hold everybody to the same standards, and having them in writing is a really great way of doing that. So this way it's public, it's right out there for everybody to see. And I've also been advised by an attorney as well that they want us to keep copies of all of our applications on record for 2 years. And that's basically to follow the statute of limitations for discrimination. And I did ask the attorney, and everybody needs to verify their own legal, statutes in their own area. So this is not legal advice, but the attorney I consulted said that I can keep them electronically. So I make sure to store everything encrypted because it has, social security numbers and whatnot. And I keep that electronically and shred the originals.
Okay.
And I know that was a long-winded answer and that went a little bit above and beyond what you asked, but I like to try to give more information than less information.
We're here to talk about real estate and landlording, so however long you want to talk about it is great. So when you get your tenants, let's say you have 15 people that came to the open house, about how many applications are you getting per property that you have to kind of wade through and look up on your freebie, tell me everything about their past website?
I would generally not get like 15 applications at once. I mean, the majority, I'm trying to remember the highest number of applications I got at one time. It might have been like 5 or 6, and that was just a really hot rental time. It wasn't, I never get anything extremely, an extremely huge quantity at any one time. And like I said,
that's doable.
Yeah, most of the time, if I get like, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 at a time, I can generally wade through them and eliminate them within the first 5-10 minutes because of looking at the free information. And obviously, if somebody gets disqualified because they didn't make enough income, well, that's a pretty straightforward thing that you have a single number in your rental guidelines that says I need a minimum income of let's say $3,000 per month, and they don't make that. Well, they're disqualified. That's just the way it is. Or, they have, an eviction in the past 2 years and you said no evictions in the past 5 years. That's pretty straightforward. So when you put your screening criteria out there, you can quickly disqualify people, or people self-disqualify. They look at your screening criteria when they're at the open house and they think to themselves, oh, I'm not going to make this. And then they just leave. I've had that definitely happen where, people will tell me, oh, this place is too small for me. But, you kind of get some ideas in your head. You think, oh, I kind of figure that this person is not going to make it because they've previously told me what their income was or something like that. So people will self-disqualify. Oh, just to go back a little bit to something I forgot before. When you put your advertisements on like Craigslist or whatnot, just put your screening criteria right in the ad. So people will then again more disqualify. So this way you might not get as many people coming to your open houses or, filling out applications, but then the people that actually do are really feel that they are qualified and they really want the property.
Sure. Those are great, great tips. So you've got your tenant list, your applications, you've gone through and you've disqualified people based on criteria or, they don't meet your criteria or, whatever. Do you tell them? Do you send them a letter that says, hey, sorry, you didn't make it because you don't have enough income or you had an eviction last month, or do you just leave it alone?
Yeah, if you imagine if you're, applying for a job or if you were applying for a rental, you'd want to know if you were accepted or not. And also, if for whatever reason, let's say something would happen to be inaccurate, you'd want to be able to make, a correction to that information. So for example, let's say somebody had a judgment and they paid it off and they thought it was listed as satisfied when really it wasn't. They'd want to know about that so they could make a correction to that. So yes, I actually do send a letter. I have a form letter that I send to every person that applies so that everybody knows exactly what the reason is. And generally people will know, if they look at it, they say, oh yeah, I've had an eviction the past year. And if they've lied, then they'll get the letter and they'll know that I figured them out. And so I've never had anybody actually contacting me and say the information that you had was wrong or whatnot. But I always include information in the form letter about how they can obtain their free credit report if they, if they want to see it or if they want to do that. So I try to be giving people helpful information, even though it's more or less a denial letter.
Okay. And Josh has another question. Do you have an application fee for your properties?
I actually don't, which is probably surprising to a lot of people because everybody's like, well, you always have to charge some type of fee. Since I get a lot of information for free and I can almost make 90% of my decision based on all the free information that I get, I try to make it a competitive advantage to not charge a fee, whereas a lot of other landlords do. And like I said, competitive advantage on the rent side, and you have a competitive advantage on the application fee side. You're just making yourself stand out, and you're making it easier for yourself to get a tenant as opposed to not.
So let's talk about tenants and how awesome they are. And when you, way back in podcast number 29, biggerpockets.com/show29, you said that you had never had an eviction. And is that still the case? Because that was recorded, like you said, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Have you had to evict anybody since then?
Yeah, that podcast was, I think, August of 2013. And at that time, obviously, I was still somewhat new since I had just started like a couple of years ago. And at that time, I didn't have any evictions. I have had an eviction since then of a tenant that I chose, but it was more of one of these situations that I went into where I kind of ignored my own advice. And whenever you do that, yep, I know, I would like to admit that I am human and I make mistakes. And so I did make a mistake in this particular case. Like I said, I talked all about the tenant screening and so forth. Well, I had a situation this past summer where I took one of my mother's friends who was looking for a place, and she really wanted to move. And she said, well, do you have any available rentals? And knowing this woman for many years, I mean, this is going back maybe 10 years or so, I kind of knew that she wasn't exactly the best with money. And so I was a little hesitant at first to rent to her. But again, it was one of those emotional things as opposed to being a subjective business decision. And I did allow her to rent the property. Yes. Oh.
Can you read that? Is it backwards?
Never rent to friends.
Okay.
And this is kind of going back to podcast number 29, where I talked about my first venture into real estate was getting involved with my cousin and her husband, which of course were family, and getting kind of screwed over. And so now I actually wound up more or less getting, I don't know if I should say screwed over, but yes, more or less I had to evict this person, this woman who claimed to be my friend. And yet she decided that maybe she didn't have to pay rent. And so I did wind up having to evict her. So even though she was somebody that I knew for many years, I still made the business decision that, hey, if you're going to disrespect me this way and not honor the contract that we had for renting this property, unfortunately, she's not my friend anymore. And I did follow through with the eviction. She has a judgment on her record. And so, like I said, I went the emotional route as opposed to making a good subjective business decision.
And you have learned your lesson and will never do that again.
Yep, this is now the second time that I have gotten, I've trusted either friends or family and I've gotten screwed over. So I think maybe the moral in my case is don't trust friends and family. I don't know.
Oh, come on. Third time's a charm.
Oh.
I would love to not pay rent, but I'm not that kind of girl. Yeah. And, I see people in the forums a lot. Oh, my brother needs a place to live and he's always had a bad track record, but, he's not going to screw me over. And that's, unfortunately, past performance is indicative of future performance. And it's one of those things where, like I said, I should have known better. I even had kind of like the
I know that she's had some issues with money. She's had to borrow money from other people sometimes. And it's one of those things where if she was anybody else, I would have definitely not rented to her. But it's one of those things where you follow your emotion. You want to trust people. You want to feel that people are not going to disrespect you. They're going to honor their commitments. They're going to behave like friends instead of, trying to get you or something like that. So yeah, and I'm willing to admit, that I made an honest mistake. And I think it's just one of those things that you have to admit so that other people can learn from it, that yes, I've had a lot of success, but I've made mistakes in my real estate investing career. And, trusting people, I think, has been my worst mistake over time, which sounds really bad because you think, you should be able to trust people in this world. Because if you don't have any trust, then you're definitely you can't be a robot. You have to have, some human emotion, but it's a matter of setting your standards, setting your policies, and making sure that everybody, no matter who they are, follows through with them, so you don't get taken advantage of.
Absolutely. And one of the hard things to do is to be firm. You feel like, well, I'm an honest person and they're a friend of mine, so they're, birds of a feather flock together. They're going to stay honest. They're going to treat me like they would treat, how I would treat them if the situation was reversed. And you seem like a wholesome all-American girl, Dawn, and
thanks.
And it's tough to meet somebody who is dishonest or who does take advantage of you. And
or you think, how could somebody possibly take advantage of me? I'm a decent person. I would never do that to somebody else. And it happens. People will just, if they have it in them, they will try to take advantage of people to, better themselves. And really, in this particular case, it really just negatively impacted her as well, because now she's got this eviction on her record. She's got a judgment on her record. Obviously, she found somewhere else to live, and nobody called me. So there are landlords out there that will not call references, and now she is somebody else's problem. And unfortunately, that person's going to have to, live with making that decision to rent to her.
Sure. And, most likely it's going to end the same way that yours did. You can't just continue to allow somebody to live in your property for free.
Exactly.
You're not going to make any money. So like I said, it's better to have the property empty, vacant for a month than to just get somebody in there, which isn't really this case. But so let's talk about having a property empty. You need to be able to pay your mortgage even if your tenants aren't paying your rent. So what sort of reserves do you account for? What sort of reserves do you have? We don't have to get into nitty-gritty numbers if you don't want to, but do you have like 12% of the mortgage or 8% of rents, or how do you figure that out?
Well, that's a very good question, because I see a common mistake on BiggerPockets of some new posts is people will think that their cash flow is just the rent minus their mortgage payment. And that's not the case, because if you think that that's all there is, you're going to be missing out on that important thing called reserves. Basically, you want to put away money for, they say put away money for a rainy day, and that's kind of the same thing here. You want to put away money for repairs, for capital expenditure items like a roof, a furnace, an AC condenser, or whatever the case may be. Plus, you also want to account for potential vacancy in the future. It's always great to think that, you'd have a tenant that would stay in your property forever and they would never leave. But, people do, change jobs. They have different life situations, and they do need to move occasionally. And so even if they're, perfectly great tenants, I've had tenants move because they bought a house. I've had tenants move because they needed to take care of a sick relative in another, city. I've had tenants move because they needed to downsize, their life situation changed. So you need to account for that vacancy factor. You need to account for repairs and so forth. For me, I actually allocate about 15% of the rent for repairs and CapEx items, and then I allocate another 8.3%, which is essentially 1/12 of the rent, for vacancy. And those are the numbers that I use, which come up to be about 23, a little over 23% of the rent amount to my reserves. Now, somebody may think, well, allocating almost 25% of my rent and then I don't get that extra cash flow, I'm not going to make any money on this property. Well, that should be a clue to say that maybe this property doesn't cash flow as well as you thought it would. And so, yes, I put away money every month to these items. And this way, when I do have a vacancy and I need to, go in there and I need to get it cleaned out, I might have a month because I'm looking for that, that good tenant that is not going to cause me to have an eviction, that's going to take care of the property, etc. I have that money squirreled away so that I'm not, scrambling to, pay my bills on that property.
And that is a 23.3% of the rent that you get. So your giant 3% rule is now, you're still cash flowing with your 23% rent put away. And that, before even buying the property, you have to take that into account. I mean, I look at, okay, well, what is a realistic amount of rent that I could get for this property? So that's one of my big factors. And it is all about knowing your market. So if your market, you can only get, $800 a month for a property, well, how much are you going to need to spend into that property and what are your expenses are going to be? How much are you going to put away for reserves? And then you can determine, are you going to be able to cash flow with that property? Now, a lot of properties that I have, I actually do own free and clear, so I don't have a mortgage, which is actually kind of nice. And the reason I was able to do that is because I was able to buy properties for pretty cheap. I've gotten some properties for, in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. Not everybody can do that. So this is why, making I know you're just so jealous on all accounts of me. But yeah, not everybody can do that. They can buy a property just straight out with cash. And so you have to take into account all these variables when you run your numbers to determine if a property is good to even buy in the first place. Yeah, that's one of the problems I'm having right now is not only am I not getting even close to the 1% rule, I am being outbid by cash offers. So I have to make my offer look as sweet as possible. I invest in a different market than you do.
Yep.
Although I am going to fly out to Milwaukee tonight and come look at houses with you. I'm going to invest with you, Dawn, because my money's not doing anything out here. So we've got a question from October Primo. Is there such thing as an overqualified tenant where you are concerned that they will leave as soon as the lease is up and increase turnover?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've necessarily had an overqualified tenant. I do have tenants with very lofty goals of wanting to own their own home someday. And it is kind of a fine line that I think when people are renting a property, you kind of not just have them fill out an application, but it is important too, at least it's important to me, to engage in a little bit of a conversation with them when they're actually filling out the application. I personally like to have a little table that I set up, a little folding table at the property, and I put a nice little, what do you call that, a tablecloth on it, and I put up all my applications with clipboards, and then I will have a chair, one for myself, and then I also have one for the other person. I have my laptop and a little scanner with me, so they can present to me their photo ID. That's also very important. I take a scan of everybody's photo ID when I take their application. I take scans of all of their proof of income, such as pay stubs or anything else that they might have. And then, like I said, I engage them in conversation. One of the most common questions I ask them is, well, have you been looking for a property for a long time? That can give you a lot of information, because somebody's response is when somebody starts talking, they may actually, you may find out more about them than you wanted to know, or you may find out some very telling information. Like I had somebody, at one time start talking and start telling me about how her their child's father was in jail, and she's just waiting for him to get paroled. And I'm just, kind of, it kind of put a little like worry in my head, like, what am I going to have to, think of? And then finding out, as I went look through the open records information, that she has a restraining order against this person, and there was issues of assault and battery at a prior property she lived in. And you go down this path because of one offhand comment that somebody makes, but it can be any type of offhand comment. So in regards to the question about the overqualified tenant, you're making conversation about them, you may find that, there's somebody saying, yeah, I'm just looking to try to increase my credit score for a while, and then I hope to buy a home someday. Those can actually be really good tenants, in the sense that I've actually had tenants who have been with me for years who said that they wanted to buy their house, but they don't quite have their act together to the point that they have the money saved up to put a down payment on a house, or they haven't gotten their credit score high enough to qualify with a bank. And those are like the perfect kind of tenants, because they're working really hard to keep their credit up. They don't want anything to damage it, like an eviction or something, or a judgment. And, they generally take good care of the property, because again, they don't want you to, kick them out or whatnot. So I hope that answers the question. I mean, like I said, you never know what's going to happen in the future. Nobody has a crystal ball. So you want to just try to make the best decisions possible. And if I have had somebody actually leave because they did buy their own house and they were with me only about a year. I mean, you're going to get turnover some fashion, no matter what, in some property. Generally, people don't ever, stay forever. You get some of those cases, but not all the time. And I'd rather just have a really good tenant that takes care of the property, that pays rent. Maybe you can refer me to somebody else that is good, than, the alternative, which is, either a vacant property or somebody that's not going to take care of the place.
Right. So you've chosen your tenant, you've screened them, they pass, you've sent everybody else a letter, and you let the one tenant know, hey, I've given you the opportunity to rent my property. What is the next step? How long do they have to get you? Do you take a deposit? I'm assuming you don't take a deposit or anything when they give you their application. You're not taking any money?
No. Like I said, one of the things I get an application fee. Secondly, I don't want to be carrying around, cash as, a single female at the showings. So that's also another factor in my decision to not take application fees. I don't take any type of security deposits at the time of application either. But once somebody is approved, I would like to I don't take a security deposit at that time. I take what's called a holding fee. And the reason being is that I don't want somebody to back out of the transaction. Now, by default, or I should say, definition of a deposit is something that is, refundable. People say non-refundable deposit, but it's kind of like one of those oxymoron type of things. So instead, I do what's called a holding fee. I have somebody sign a paper that states, in essence, this holding fee is to be applied towards the security deposit when you take occupancy by a certain date. If you don't take occupancy by a certain date, then the holding fee is forfeit. So I definitely make somebody, sign that. They're basically putting their money where their mouth is. They're saying, yes, I am committed to this property. I'm not going to back out. If I back out, then the landlord gets to keep the money for their troubles. And then I've never had anybody back out from that.
And how much is your holding fee? How much is your security deposit? And what is rent? Are you collecting like $500 rent, $800 rent typically?
Okay, well, that was like 3 questions all right there. So I'll try to answer them one at a time here. So in terms of the security deposit, a general rule of thumb is you want to collect at least 1 month's rent as a security deposit. And of course, that's to make sure that if somebody skips out, and doesn't pay you that last month, that you have something to keep from them. However, you can charge, definitely check your state's, rules and regulations, but in many cases you can charge over and above what 1 month's rent is. Some people charge a month and a half, other people charge a little bit more. It all just depends on what you're comfortable with. for that, for that rental. And you want to, of course, make sure that you advertise up front what your security deposit will be, because you don't want to suddenly charge one person one amount and then you would have charged somebody else a different amount, because that can be discriminatory as well.
Yes. Yeah.
I tend to like. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just about to say I like to do either 1 month's rent or more, a little bit more than 1 month's rent for a security deposit.
And then what is your holding fee?
Generally, for the holding fee, I'd like to get at least half of what the security deposit would be, to make it at least that somebody's putting down, several $100s, that they know that it's going to hurt them if they walk away from this.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. What's a $10 holding fee? Oh, I found an apartment I like better. Well, then never mind. And they may or may not tell you that they found an apartment they like better, and you're holding this apartment for $10 or nothing. So
exactly.
That is a great point. And what I was going to say is I just did a boatload of research on state landlord tenant laws. And I don't know why we are the 50 United States of America and we have 50 different states worth of laws. 51 because we've got the District of Columbia taxation without representation. So yeah, they are all different. And some say, I believe a month is the lowest amount that you're allowed to, or like the highest low amount. Some are 2 months, some are unlimited, but I think a month is, I don't think there's any state that is lower than 1 month rent for security deposit as the height, as the cap for security deposits. It's very confusing what every state can do. So that's why it's always important for everybody, if they're going to become a landlord, just, it may be boring, but just take that time and look through your state statutes, even local, statutes. And if you don't necessarily know where all that information is, do some internet research, talk to other people on BiggerPockets, find out where you can get that information, and just, take an afternoon or an evening and just read through all that stuff to make sure you're familiar with it, because you want to have, if you're going to be an involved landlord as opposed to a hands-off landlord, you want to make sure that you, brief yourself on that type of information. Absolutely. And yeah, a good place to start is to Google your state's name, landlord tenant laws. So Wisconsin would be just Google Wisconsin landlord tenant law. And that's a good place to start. Wisconsin is amazing and wonderful in every way. They have so many different resources for you. I remember the Madison Landlord Association or something. I'm not getting the names right. I did just go through all 50 states plus the District of Columbia. So they all kind of get jumbled together, but I do remember that Wisconsin had a lot of information available and a lot of different, it was easy to find. I will say that not all 50 states are easy to find. Maryland is some of the worst. So Russell Brazil, you're in Maryland, right? I'm pretty sure you're going to have a hard time finding your landlord tenant laws. I sure did. Okay, so I have asked all of the questions that I had on my page, and I believe I have asked all the questions in the sidebar. If anybody else has another question, let's ask it quick. Dawn is always on the BiggerPockets forum, so if you think of something later, you can certainly ask her. She is a delight to talk to on the forums as well as in person, but we have been going for an hour and 11 minutes, and Dawn is a very busy lady. So I want to say thank you so much, Dawn, for giving me your time today. I really appreciate it. And I know that everybody watching learned at least something. Josh says, thank you. So everybody give Dawn props. Woo, the little hands right here. Everybody click on there and give Dawn props and say thank you so much for your time. And the replay will be available on BiggerPockets. I'll put a thing in the forums a little bit later today or tomorrow. I keep hitting my table and my thing keeps shaking. So with that, I will say I hope you all have a lovely evening, and thank you so much, Dawn.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Okay. Oh, and somebody told Little Bird too. Everybody go up to the left-hand side and tell a Little Bird that tweets it out to everybody, and then they can watch the replay. Okay, so we are signing off. Bye. Bye, Dawn.